Okay, so this video is made to help you with chapter 6 of the textbook. And I want to make a short video here just talking about how we can combine the domestic supply curve and the the supply curve for the rest of the world to get the supply curve on the model that we will then use to analyze trade and then a tariff. And so to do this, let's just go back to when we first introduced either demand or supply and principles of microeconomics or principles of macroeconomics. We talk about how we can have a supply schedule for an individual firm, and then we go from there to get the market supply curve. So I just made up some numbers here to illustrate here. Let's start by saying we have two firms, and then we want to combine and get the market supply curve for those two firms. We'll call that the total Q. So let's just making up some numbers, say at a price of $3, firm 1 is willing to supply quantity 1, firm 2 will supply 0. Price of 4, it's 3 and 4 for the two firms, and then at a price of 5, it's 5 and 8. To get the market supply curve, all you'd have to do is add up the quantities of each individual firm at the different prices. So at a price of 3 and 1 and 0 would give us a market supply of 1. And at a price of 4, we have a market supply of 7. And then at a price of 5, 5 plus 8 gives us a market supply of 13. So we're adding up the curves horizontally. We're taking for any price, take the quantity that would be supplied there. Now we're going to do this a little differently. We're going to assume that one of the supply curves is the supply curve of the domestic suppliers, so all the producers supplying this good in the country that we're examining. And we're going to end up and then we're going to consider the supply curve for the rest of the world. The supply curve for domestic part we'll draw in both cases here to look pretty similar. With normal kind of standard upward sloping supply curve. I'll put a D there to indicate that that's the supply curve for the domestic suppliers of the good. And again, this is a supply and demand. So we're going back to supply and demand. So we have the price of the good and then the quantity on the axes. So this gives us the supply curve. It obeys the law of supply. At a higher price, the quantity supplied is larger. And this would summarize the behavior of all of the firms in this country that are supplying the good. Now what we have to do is add in the supply curve for the rest of the world. Well, in this first case here, we'll take what we'll call a small nation. In international trade, a small nation would be one that can import or buy as much of the good as they might want from the rest of the world without driving up the world price. That's an extreme case, probably beyond what you'd ever observe in reality, but you also sort of see it. If you're talking about in the world market for oil, which is in the 80 million barrels a day or so get bought and sold, if you're talking about a country that might be importing 100,000 barrels of oil, that's so small relative to the global quantities that we could ignore any impact of this country buying the good on the world market. Now, if that's the case, if the country can buy as much as they want at the world price, then what we would need to do is think about the supply curve we'd have for the rest of the world here, and that would end up being a horizontal or perfectly elastic supply curve for the rest of the world at the world price. So we come in here, here's the world price, we'll call that PW, and the supply curve for the rest of the world is horizontal at that price, meaning that this country could come in and buy whatever quantity they wanted from the rest of the world. We'll call that SW. They can buy whatever quantity they want for the rest of the world at this price of PW. They could buy a small quantity, medium quantity, big quantity. They can buy as much as they want at that price. All right, so here's our two curves. We want to add them together, sort of what we did here. So we want to take it at any for any price and add up the quantity that would be supplied. Well, for our price below PW here, all we have is the domestic supply curve. at a price below PW, this country is not going to be able to buy any of this good from the rest of the world. People in the rest of the world are simply not going to be interested in selling here. Because the flip side is not only can this country buy as much as they want from the rest of the world at this price, the suppliers in the rest of the world have no interest in selling this to this country at a price of less than PW, because there are lots of other buyers out there in the world, and they're all paying a price of PW. So the folks in this small nation cannot buy any of this good from the rest of the world at a price of below PW. So at any price below PW, the only supply is the domestic supply. So our overall supply curve is going to be equal to the domestic supply curve in this range. Then we get to PW. Now above PW, domestic suppliers are still willing to supply more if they get a higher price. But the price is never going to go above PW, because at PW then the customers or the people in this country would immediately switch over and start buying any extra units they'd want to buy from the rest of the world. And they can buy as many as they want at the rest of the world. The domestic suppliers would never get up to this portion of the supply curve, because the price will simply never go above PW. So if we want to think about what's the supply curve for this country when they allow international trade, so in other words, combining these two supply curves, it's going to look like this. It's going to be the domestic supply curve up until PW, and that becomes horizontal, follows the world supply curve to the right. And so that's then what the, call that ST, that's the supply total. That's the total supply in this country once they allow free trade. If they don't allow free trade, then it's only the domestic supply curve. But once they allow the international trade, the supply curve looks like the purple one that I've drawn in here, ST. It's the domestic supply curve up until you hit the world price, and then you follow the horizontal world price after that. Now I also have here, I have to adjust so you can see this, we'll consider the large nation case down here. And in the large nation case, the issue here is that this country is now big enough that if they wanted to, that when they go to buy at the world price, they might bid up or drive up the world price. And so what we do here is we'd have a supply curve for the domestic suppliers. It'd still be upward sloping, look about like we did before. And then we have the supply curve for the rest of the world. The supply curve for the rest of the world now is also upward sloping. It looks like this. So it's more of like a traditional supply curve, and then more of what you would have, what you would be adding two supply curves together to get the market supply curve, which you might see back in principles. Now you have to sum up these two these two supply curves here to get the total supply. That's exactly what we were doing up here with these numbers. Graphically, that's adding these curves horizontally. So what you do here is you come in, and the way I've drawn it, the world supply curve extends a little bit down there. So we'd have, for the total, once this country allows free trade, then you'd have a supply curve that would look like this. The purple one. And what you're doing is you're taking at every quantity, at every price here, the quantity that domestic suppliers would want to supply, plus the quantity that world suppliers would want to supply there, add them together, and that gives us the supply curve for the total supply curve for this country. This is a large nation, and again, the distinction then between large nation is and small nation. Small nation will take the case of they can buy as much as they want at the world price, so the supply curve from the rest of the world is horizontal. In a large nation, if they want to buy more from the rest of the world, they have to pay a higher price. The price gets bid up. And so you have a standard or traditional positively sloped supply curve for the rest of the world, and then you'd add these together to get the total amount if they had free trade. So in our large nation, if they had no trade at all, they'd be on their domestic supply curve, and then if they have free trade, they would have the total supply curve that looks like that. So that would be their two options depending on whether they have trade or not. So that's how we get the world supply curve. And then I'll make another video then to see how we can use this to analyze trade and then tariffs.